I'm live. I'm reading out of Scarlet Feathers. It's a farm memory book written by Joan Grant. She was a seer and she was born in 1907, and she wrote books of her farm memories. I loved reading her over a decade ago, and this one was one of my favorite. It's the story of a tribe and the story about Raki, who is the cousin of Piyanah. Piyanah is the main character. So her mother has died. Everybody's very sad, and they are together, Raki and Piyanah, and Nini, who is their helper, or used to help her mother, who has just passed away a little while ago. And they just talked about the sorrow bird. We are now Shadow of the Totem, is this fifth reading of it. After the choosing, I kept away from the squaw's teepee, for I disliked being reminded that I was female, and I made Raki repeat his promise that he would never let me go to Littledom. Of course you'll never be a squaw, he said indignantly. We two are a pair, like two chipmunks, or two grizzlies, or two of anything that isn't stupid enough to belong to a tribe. The terrible thing is, Raki, that the squaws don't realize that the laws are unfair. They look on them as something which can't be altered, like the winter being so long and cold. You happen to have been born a boy, and so, if you wanted to, we could be first a young brave, then a brown feather, and then a scarlet feather, and then an elder or even a chief. But all that a girl can expect is to be chosen, which is probably very disagreeable, and then to have babies. And if those are boys, they're taken away from her just when she's grown really fond of them, and they are old enough to be interesting. Then, years and years later, they would become one of the old women and enjoy bullying the younger ones and telling them horrible and unlikely stories. Males have got everything and females nothing. Even the worst of man has a better time than any woman. Not the naked foreheads, said Raki. Well, they hardly count, I said unfeelingly. If they chose to go on for their silly ordeals and then fail, so that everyone despises them, they can't expect pity. They can't help being born into the tribe, objected Raki. At least, no one expects anything of women. But if a boy happens to be naturally afraid of things, it must be terrible to know that he has either to do them or lose all privileges. I talked to a naked forehead yesterday. He was so surprised that I spoke to him as an equal that I thought he was going to cry. He couldn't climb rocks without getting giddy and falling, and they wouldn't let him do some other trial instead. At least they offered to let him take his canoe down the Great Rapid, but he thought that was even worse than climbing. So eventually the elders declared he would never win a feather, and so must become a naked forehead, as he would never be worthy to wear the tribal mark. Apart from being ashamed, the naked foreheads don't have such a bad time, though, do they? Well, they have to take orders from the old women. Though they oughtn't to mind that, of course, he added hastily. And they have to do all the scavenging and carry game the hunters have killed and clean the skin of the deer. Why shouldn't they do it? If they didn't, the women would have to. You don't understand, Piyanah. For a man, it's shaming to have to do things like that. It's just as disagreeable for women to have them do it. And if women aren't ashamed, it only shows they've got a little more sense than I thought. Naked foreheads can't take a squaw at the choosing. Do they ever father children? No, and if they get even a little interested in a woman, they are branded on the forehead. And I think other things happen to them as well, and they are then exiled from the star tribe. Perhaps I had better try to remember the naked foreheads are not really men, and then it will be easy to be nice to them. Do you hate all men, Piyanah? I like a few of them, but they are people like us who got into a tribe by mistake. The ones who enjoy the laws of separation are enemies. I wish I could turn them into slugs and then squash them with a heavy stone. Braves made their own arrows, but all the other skilled crafts were done by the half-brothers, men who had been injured and could no longer fight or hunt, but earned their right to the protection of the tribe in other ways. Tanek, the canoe builder, could only hobble, leaning on a stick, for the muscles of his right leg had been torn by a mountain lion. Below the knee it was withered, and the toes curled under like claws. No one was so wise as Tanek in the selection of birch bark, or knowing the grain of wood to make the ribs, or in choosing the sinews which go into the making of a canoe. Raki and I often went to watch him working on one of them he was building for us. He carved a pattern of feathers on the prow and made the paddles, one for each of us, from red birch. In a canoe he forgot he was a cripple and took us down rapids that until then had been forbidden to us. He named the rocks, telling us how to recognize their characters, which ones were kindly and fell sheer into the deep water, and which pretended to be harmless and then thrust out a jagged ledge just under the surface to rip open the canoe of the unwary. He taught us to know water by its color, and where to watch for eddies, how to paddle so quietly that we left only a ripple that might have marked the passage of a mohan, how to make a canoe leap forward even against the current, and where to cross to the other side of the river, using the flow instead of fighting against it. The half-brothers each had a small teepee of their own in a clearing upriver from the main encampment. Tanek's teepee smelt of new wood and deer sinews, except when he was boiling fish glue, and then there was no room for any other smell. Minchi, who was much older than Tanek and rather surly, was also lame. He would never speak of how he lost his foot, but one of the boys told Raki that he had been burned in a prairie fire, and a demon had prevented the wound from healing until the foot rotted off. He made all the pottery, except some of the roughest food bowls used by women, and beside his teepee he had a small pit full of red clay, which was brought by canoe 4 days' journey downriver. From this he made water jars, the bowls used by the chief and the elders, and everything considered worthy of decoration. Most of the decorations were wavy lines and dots, and sometimes a row of little crosses. Tanek had warned me that they meant snakes and stars and even birds and animals, so I was able to admire them properly, which pleased Minchi so much that he gave me some of the clay to make a food bowl for Raki. Shaping it was much more difficult than it looked, but Minchi said the unevenness didn't matter, and he put it into the oven. A hole in the ground lined with stones, with a fire above it. I'm looking for my tea. With a fire above it. Pigments were made from special rare clay, yellow, and a dark, rich red. This was baked, ground to powder, and then mixed with white of egg. It was not always easy for Minchi to get enough eggs, so Raki and I used to find them for him, usually along the riverbank. They had to be fresh or else they spoiled the final colors. Narok, the tribal drummer, was also a half-brother, for he was blind. Though neither of us realized this until we had seen him several times, because he walked fast and without hesitation. Tanek told me he lost his sight through the ordeal, which he hoped would have made him a scarlet feather, the highest honor to which any redskin can attain, and before that he had been a famous tracker. Gradually, pace by pace, he learned the ground in every direction from his teepee, so that he no longer had to rely on a guide. Raki and I had been upriver in our canoe and returning in the early evening when we heard the muffled beat of a drum. We took our paddles from the water and drifted in silence to listen where the sound came from. It seemed to come from the thicket of young alders on the south bank. So we tied the canoe to a tree growing by the water and crept through the undergrowth until we reached a glade. Narok was sitting on the trunk of a fallen tree with a drum between his knees. He was tapping it with his long, flexible hands, the rhythm steady as the beat of a man asleep, and my heart steadied to the same beat. His eyes were open. They seemed to see us and beyond to a far horizon. The sound belonged to the trees and to the water and the rocks and to us, as though we were all part of a living body whose great heart was the great hunter's. The rhythm changed. It spoke of courage and splendid battles and the war cries of braves in victory. Then it grew slower and heavier. It was after the battle and death canoes were going downriver to their last sunset. The chief was standing by the pool of falling water, holding my mother in his arms before he gave her to the before people. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, and yet the sadness of the drum was beautiful as the crying of curlews through the mist of a winter evening. I do not think that he can have heard us, yet when his hands let the drum fall asleep, he said, "There are two people listening, young and happy. Is it Raki and Piyanah?" We came forward and sat on the grass beside him. "I'm glad you understand the language of the drums," he said. "There are few who understand. What did they say to you?" I tried to tell him about the trees and the rocks being part of a living being who's the earth, and the joy of battle and the sorrow which followed thereafter. He smiled. "So I have not betrayed my drum. When my eyes said they would no longer serve me, I asked the great hunters that I might learn to use my inward sight. For a long time I thought they had not heard me, for the night in which I lived remained unbroken. The tribal drummer was old and could no longer keep rhythm from dawn until sunset, and I was young and blind and useless. It was the chief who asked me to learn the language of the drums in service to the tribe, and for the first time the long night was a kindly darkness. I'm no longer blind, Piyanah. There are eyes in my hands, and they know the texture of bark and of leaves, the color of a stone, the humor of a plant, whether it's sad or singing. Out of the darkness I have made a little earth. I know each path, and where the trees are spaced, even if I walk a long way, I know what the next pace will bring. Turf or gravel or smooth rock to my feet. And in a drum I can see battles which have been forgotten, and mountains we have never crossed, and sunsets which belongs to the generations." "Can you see the before people?" asked Raki eagerly. "Are they the singing people who laugh and are young and even when their bodies grow old?" "They must be the same," I said. "They had white houses and trees with yellow fruit, so heavy that I could not hold even one of them between my hands. I cannot remember their houses, only their songs. I hear them always behind the voices of my drum, between the sound and the silence." After this, Narok was our friend, but he told us not to tell anyone that we talked to him, for, he said, "It is only with you I wish to share my silence." His loyalty to the chief would not let him speak against the tribe, but he let us understand that he too felt a stranger amongst them. "I loved my mother," he said, "but she never told me the name of my father, only that he was a scarlet feather. She made me promise to be worthy of him. She died soon after I went to live with the boys, so I could not ask her to release me from my promise. I was a brown feather when I was 17. I found it difficult to remember the importance of endurance, to believe that a cliff was a challenge to the climber, and not a curve against the sky to be enjoyed. Perhaps that is why my eyes deserted me, because I refused so many things they brought me and kept them about such ordinary tasks. They taught me to delight in the flock of white birches on the mountainside, and I said to them, "Birches, how far are they from the river? Is their bark ready for canoes?" They showed me trout, fluid as water among the reeds, and I said to them, where is the exact place to cast a fish spear?" They showed me a doe standing with 1 4-foot leaped in dappled shade, and I said to them, "She is in her 3rd year, meet for the cooking pot." They showed me the river in flood, and I said to them, "Their pack ice will make it too dangerous for canoes. Our journey must be delayed 3 days." My eyes offered me joy, but I valued them only because they were useful in little things that do not matter to the spirit. "When did your eyes go away?" I said. "At the gathering of the 30 tribes, which takes place every 7 years. The braves vie with each other, and the chiefs boast which of them has the most wearers of the scarlet. To earn the title of Scarlet Feather, you must be a full member of the tribe and then pass an ordeal to prove that you have overcome fear. The ordeal is chosen by the chiefs in council, and they make very sure that it tests you to the utmost. At the place of the gathering there is a rock above the river called the Eagle Rock. It leaps from the water the height of 20 men standing on each other's shoulders, and the pool below is so narrow that only a perfect dive can end in safety. Many had died there in the past. I thought beyond the water I might find the land of the singing, but if this was denied to me I should have fulfilled my promise and wear the scarlet in my forehead tongue. I knew as I fell towards the pool that I was too far from the rock. I felt my hands break the surface, then a dull blow and a whirling darkness, a darkness that has gone on and on. There was no welcome for me beyond the water, so I wait here, until the drums of the great hunters tell me I am free to go. This was the chapter about the shadow of the totem. Next one is Feathers of the Future. Happy Sunday, everyone.